Before we jump into the story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I had always considered my friendship with Ethan one of the most stable and uncomplicated aspects of my life. We first met back in college, both of us bonding over our shared interest in technology and gaming. As time passed, our connection grew, and I became a frequent visitor at his home in a quiet, unassuming suburb of Portland. His mother, Olivia, was always the picture of warmth and hospitality. What had initially seemed like a simple, caring gesture on her part, welcoming me into their home, soon revealed layers that made me see her in an entirely different light. It wasn't just her kindness that captivated me, but the way her charm and confidence subtly filled the room, her soft smile, exuding an effortless grace that made it difficult to look away. On this particular day, I found myself with a bit of free time and a longing for some companionship, so I decided to drop by Ethan's place without any warning. The weather had turned chilly, and the gray sky overhead threatened rain, but I didn't mind. I had always enjoyed the quiet serenity of his neighborhood, and today seemed like the perfect opportunity to spend time with a good friend. I parked my car near the house and made my way toward the front door, where I was greeted by Olivia. She looked as stunning as I remembered. The simple, understated beauty of her white blouse and jeans emphasized her graceful figure, while the faint aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the air, mixing with the earthy scent of rain. "Liam, what a pleasant surprise," she said with a smile, her eyes lighting up as she recognized me. "Ethan's not home right now. He went to the city to pick up a few things." "Oh," I said. Feeling a bit awkward, I thought we could hang out for a bit. She gave a knowing nod and stepped aside to let me in. "Well, since you're here, come in, I won't leave you out there with a storm coming." The invitation felt almost too casual, yet something about the way she spoke made me feel more welcome than I had anticipated. Once inside, a slight unease settled in my chest. Her gaze was warm, but there was something about it that was different from the usual, friendly politeness I was accustomed to. Olivia led me to the living room, where a soft couch sat invitingly, and on the coffee table were a newspaper and a half-finished cup of tea. She seemed to know exactly what to do, effortlessly moving about the house, as though hosting was second nature to her. "Tea or coffee?" she asked, as if it was simply the next step in our interaction. "Tea if it's not too much trouble," I replied, trying to mask the slight discomfort I was feeling. When she returned with the tea, the sound of raindrops against the windows had already started to pick up, the rhythm of the storm becoming more pronounced. Olivia's voice soft and soothing. "Cut through the quiet, it seems the rain is settled in. Looks like you'll be waiting here for a while." I nodded, trying to adjust to the sudden change in atmosphere. Despite the tension that lingered between us, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief at the prospect of not having to rush through my visit. We began to talk first about work and then about the small, everyday things that often dominate conversation. Olivia laughed at my stories about office life, her smile so warm and easy that I couldn't help but feel a little more at ease myself. "You've always been so smart, Liam," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that only added to the natural elegance she exuded. "Ethan used to tell me how you helped him with his college projects." I grinned, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, back then he could still pay me in pizza for my help." The comment made her laugh, and for a brief moment I felt as if everything was back to normal. But then the conversation shifted. Olivia spoke about the time she spent alone, how despite her busy life, there were moments when it all felt stagnant. Her openness caught me off guard. I had never heard her speak like this before, and I began to sense that she wasn't just talking for the sake of conversation. There was something deeper behind her words. "Sometimes it feels like no one even notices me," she said, her eyes gazing thoughtfully into her cup. Her vulnerability, so unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. Just as I was about to respond, The loud crack of thunder startled us both. Olivia smiled as she stood, brushing off the tension with an air of casual grace. It was like the power might go out. "I should check the flashlights," she said, making her way to the hallway. I stayed in the living room, a subtle tension hanging in the air. The rain intensified, casting the house into a muted half-light that seemed to deepen the stillness of the room. When she returned, her expression was pensive. As if lost in thought, she sat down across from me once more, her gaze holding mine just a little longer than usual. The silence between us grew thick, and for a moment it felt as though time had slowed down, with only the sound of the rain tapping against the windows, breaking the stillness, Olivia said, her voice quiet but steady. "I always appreciate when someone does what they feel is right." Her words were spoken with a subtle weight, a quiet seriousness that I hadn't expected. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary, and it was as if the room had grown even quieter, the air heavier with the unspoken tension that had started to build. In that moment, everything changed. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing a side of our connection that neither of us had fully acknowledged before. The rain outside continued its steady rhythm against the windows, but instead of bringing a sense of peace, it seemed to underscore the growing tension between us. The room, once familiar and comforting, now felt like an entirely different place, charged with an energy I couldn't quite understand. Olivia sat across from me, her posture still graceful, like an actress who knew exactly how to command the stage. Her legs were crossed at the edge of the couch, and every subtle shift, every glance, seemed to pull me deeper into a strange, magnetic pull that I hadn't been prepared for. I tried to focus on the conversation, but my mind kept wandering, trying to make sense of the feeling growing between us. "Liam," she said, her voice soft and inviting as she squinted slightly, her gaze intense but warm. "How often do you allow yourself to truly relax?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. Probably not as often as I should." I answered, my voice a bit more strained than I intended, trying to mask the unease in my chest. She chuckled, a sound so natural and effortless that it put me further on edge. "You always seem so put together," she said, her eyes never leaving mine, her smile both kind and knowing. "It's both impressive and intriguing." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel my discomfort rise, as if sensing my hesitation. Olivia stood from the couch, her movements fluid and almost feline in nature. Graceful and purposeful, she walked toward the window, staring out at the rain as it trickled down the glass, a distant look in her eyes. She began, her voice softer now, as though speaking more to herself than to me. "I've always liked how the rain cleanses everything. It washes things away afterward." You could start over. Her words seemed innocent enough, but there was something in the way she spoke them, something deeper, like she was talking about more than just the weather. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply watched as she moved closer, her presence becoming more tangible. She pointed to a book on the shelf beside me. "Have you ever read this?" she asked, her voice almost playful, like she was offering a secret. I turned to look at the book. She indicated it was an old, worn collection of Robert Frost poetry, its edges frayed and yellowed with age, and the margins filled with her notes, a clear sign of the connection she had to the work. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. "Yes, a little, I said, smiling faintly. "Ethan never really cared for poetry, I think. You must have been the one who inspired him to at least pretend he enjoyed literature. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me." Her laughter was soft, but there was something in it that felt both sad and genuine. "Perhaps," she said, "but it's rare in this house to find someone who genuinely wants to talk about anything deep." as she returned to the couch. She sat closer this time, less than a meter away from me. The air between us feeling thick with something unsaid. The space that had once felt comfortable now seemed loaded with an almost palpable tension. "Liam," she asked again, her voice quieter now, her eyes steady and searching. "Do you ever feel like you're missing something important?" The question caught me off guard, its weight settling in my chest. It felt more personal than anything I'd expected. I hesitated, then answered quietly, "Yes, sometimes." "And what do you do when you feel that way?" she asked, her voice softening as if trying to reach something inside me. I shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of her gaze. "To be honest, I don't know. I guess I just try to focus on what I have." Her expression turned more serious, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and something deeper. Almost contemplative. Slowly, she reached out her hand, brushing gently against mine. The touch was so unexpected that I froze for a moment. Unsure of how to react. "That's a good answer," she whispered, "but sometimes, Liam, what we already have is just an excuse not to move forward." Her words were like a challenge, pushing me to confront something I wasn't ready to face. I looked into her eyes, and in that instant, it felt as though time had stopped. The room faded into the background, leaving only her presence and the electric charge between us. "You've always been so straightforward," she said, her voice a little shakier now, as if the weight of the moment was beginning to affect her too. I couldn't tell who made the first move, whether it was her or me, but suddenly we were closer than we had ever been. Her hand gently touched my face, her fingers brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. The touch was tender, and I felt her breath on my skin, the sound of the rain outside blending with a rapid beat of my own heart. Then, before I could think, our lips met a gentle kiss, tentative as if testing the waters to see if this was the right thing. The kiss lasted only a brief moment, but it was enough to leave an endless swirl of emotions in its wake. We both pulled away, our gazes locking. And in that moment, we both realized that we had crossed the line, yet neither of us made a move to step back. The world seemed to stand still as we sat there, breathing in the space that now felt both too close and too far away. "Olivia," I began, my voice catching, but the words stuck in my throat. She smiled softly, her eyes warm, but there was a hint of sadness behind them. "You're a good person, Liam," she said, her voice a whisper. She stood up from the couch, breaking the spell, and now I need to check if the porch is wet. She left the room, leaving me behind, lost in a swirl of thoughts that I couldn't quite piece together. What just happened? What did it mean for us? And how would this change everything that had been so simple just a few hours ago? I sat there staring at the space where she had been, the weight of the kiss still lingering in the air around me. When I heard Olivia close the terrace door behind her, I realized I needed to calm my racing thoughts. The weight of the situation felt almost surreal. Her words, her gaze. That kiss. I sat there on the couch, staring blankly at the floor, hoping that the patterns in the carpet might somehow offer some clarity or an answer. Outside, the rain continued its steady pour, the rhythmic sound of the raindrops against the window, providing the only anchor to reality. In a world that felt suddenly disorienting, I knew I couldn't stay lost in my thoughts for much longer, so I decided to distract myself. Standing up, I wandered over to the mantel, where several family photos were displayed. I let my eyes move over them, trying to ground myself in something familiar. The pictures depicted a young Olivia and Ethan, both grinning in the carefree way only youth allows. Beside Ethan, a tall man stood, presumably his father, but as my gaze lingered on the other photographs, I noticed something that caught me off guard. Some of the images showed Olivia alone, her smile not as bright, her eyes carrying a subtle sadness, that suggested there were years in her life that she hadn't shared with me. Do you enjoy looking at old photos? Olivia's voice made me jump slightly. I turned to find her standing in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The steam curled upward, adding to the stillness of the room. They say more than one might think. I replied, my voice a little more strained than I intended. As I gestured toward a photo, "You have a wonderful family." She stepped closer, standing beside me. Her gaze passed over the photos, resting on one in particular. This was taken a year before everything changed. She said, her tone softening, as she nodded toward a picture of her and Ethan on the beach. "We went to California, I remember. He convinced me to try water skiing. I'd never laughed so hard." Her voice held warmth, but beneath it, there was a hint of nostalgia, like she was mourning the loss of something precious. She turned toward me, her eyes meeting mine, and I felt that same electric tension filling the space between us. Again, heavier now, more pronounced. "Liam?" she asked suddenly, her voice light but probing. "Why are you always so serious?" The question threw me off guard. I could feel the weight of her eyes on me, the challenge in them, as if I have been holding something back. "You're still young," she added with a small teasing smile. "You should carry some lightness with you." I laughed, trying to brush off the unease creeping up on me. "Maybe because I'm trying to be an adult," I said, shrugging. Though I couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, though sometimes it doesn't work. Her smile widened slightly, her eyes softening with understanding. "Sometimes being an adult means allowing yourself to be vulnerable," she said, her voice gentle yet certain. The words lingered in the air, almost like a hidden challenge, one that I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. She took a step back then, as if inviting me to follow her. "Come on," she said, her voice a little more firm now. "Let's make sure the guest room is ready." As we made our way upstairs, I suddenly noticed the silence in the house. The rain, which had been so loud moments ago, now felt muted. The soft creak of the wooden floor beneath my feet seemed amplified. In the stillness, it was as though the house itself was holding its breath. Olivia opened the door to the guest room where I was to stay the night. "It's been a while since I prepared this room," she said quietly as she stepped inside. "I hope it's still in order." If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop it too in the comments to let me know you're still with me. I followed her into the room, taking in its simple charm, a cozy space with a white bedspread neatly covering the bed, and a small nightstand with a lamp beside it. Olivia moved toward the bed, leaning over to straighten the pillows, her movements calm, precise, almost automatic, but as she did, everything that had happened earlier, the conversation, the kiss, flooded back to me in a rush, making it harder to breathe. "Olivia," I started, my voice catching in my throat. She turned to face me, a look of surprise flashing across her features for just a moment. We stood there for a long beat, our eyes locking, neither of us sure of how to move forward. Her confident expression shifted to something else. Expectation mixed with doubt and uncertainty I hadn't seen before. It's hard to explain, but I feel I trailed off, unsure of how to put the chaos of emotions into words. "There's no need to explain, Liam," she interrupted, her voice soft, almost reassuring, and before I knew what was happening, she took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. Her warmth pulling me in her hand gently touched my cheek, the touch so unexpected that I froze for a moment. The world seemed to narrow down to just her. The feel of her hand on my face, the weight of her gaze on mine, and in that instant I knew I couldn't step back. We were already too far gone. We drew closer, our lips meeting once again. This time there was no hesitation. It was slow, warm, and deep. as though we were both trying to communicate, something that words could never express. The kiss was an unspoken promise, a shared understanding of something far more profound than either of us could articulate. When she pulled away, her eyes searched mine, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" She whispered, her voice barely audible. I knotted my throat tight, unable to speak instead of answering. I pulled her closer, feeling as though the walls of the small bedroom were becoming our private world, shutting out everything else. The next morning, I woke to the sound of thunder rumbling in the distance. The light outside the window was dim, casting long shadows across the room, and the rain continued its steady rhythm on the roof. It took me a moment to recognize where I was: the white bedspread in the guest room and the familiar surroundings. Olivia's house slowly brought me back to the present. But as the memories from the previous night flooded back, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and emptiness. The kiss, the connection, the unspoken words, they had changed everything. And yet as I lay there, I realized that I had no idea what came next. I didn't know how this moment would affect everything I had known, about myself, about Olivia, or about the future. The uncertainty hung in the air, thick and unresolved, as I tried to make sense of what had just happened, and where it might lead. Olivia wasn't in the room when I woke up, and for a brief moment the quiet seemed to stretch on forever, as if the world had paused, waiting for me to make sense of the whirlwind that had unraveled the night before. The dim light filtering in through the curtains barely illuminated the room, and I found myself staring at the unfamiliar surroundings, for a few moments trying to remember how I had ended up there. The clock on the wall read 7:00 a.m. The faint hum of a radio drifted from downstairs, its soft, familiar sounds offering a fleeting sense of normalcy. I sat up slowly, the events of the previous night rushing back to me. Olivia's touch, the kiss, the look in her eyes as we pulled away from each other. My thoughts felt disjointed, like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite fit together. I needed space and time to think, but everything felt unsettled. I rubbed my temples, hoping the movement would clear the fog in my mind. But it only deepened my confusion. I was stuck in the tension between what had happened and what should happen next. The soft scent of fresh coffee wafted through the air, mingling with a light mist of rain tapping against the windows. Urging me to move, I had to leave the room, had to face what was coming, even if I didn't know how to approach it. I dressed quickly, mechanically pulling on my clothes as if by doing so, I might somehow gain control over the swirl of emotions inside me. The rain outside was still steady, a constant reminder of the chaos that had come with the storm, both outside and within me. When I reached the stairs and descended to the kitchen, I heard the soft clink of ceramic against the counter. There she was, standing by the kitchen counter with a mug in her hand, carefully pouring coffee into 2 cups. Olivia appeared calm, even serene, as if the world hadn't just shifted under her feet or mine. The soft gray sweater she wore looked comforting, and her movements were deliberate and unhurried. She looked like she hadn't been touched by the storm, that it turned everything upside down. I paused at the doorway, taking a moment to observe her, almost as if I were seeing her for the first time. The peace she radiated was so at odds with what had transpired between us. For a brief second, it felt as though nothing had happened at all, as if the night had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But I knew better. I could still feel the charge between us, an unspoken understanding that hung in the air, like a quiet tension waiting to break. "Good morning," she said, her voice as gentle and easy as it always was, her smile inviting me into the quiet of the moment. But even in her calmness, I noticed the slight hesitance in her eyes, something that had never been there before. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded, my throat a little tight. "Yeah, I guess I walked closer, trying to act normal, but every step felt heavier than the last. Her calm exterior only made the knot in my chest grow tighter. We hadn't spoken about what had happened, and yet it felt like it was between us in the quietest of ways. An invisible thread that neither of us knew how to untangle. "Olivia," I began, my voice thick with the words I hadn't yet found a way to say. But she raised the hand to stop me, a soft, almost imperceptible gesture. "Let's just have breakfast first," she said, her tone light, but with a touch of something else beneath it, something I couldn't quite place. "There's still time to talk." She set the coffee in front of me, and we sat at the table for a moment. The only sound in the room was the gentle hum of the radio and the soft clink of utensils. We made small talk about the rainy morning, about how hard it was to get used to Portland's chilly summers. But I could tell Olivia was distant, her mind far away. It wasn't that she wasn't trying to engage with me, but I could sense her thoughts were elsewhere. Just as mine were, we were both stuck in a place where the words we needed to say were locked behind a wall. We didn't know how to break through. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The silence that hung between us grew heavier, and I could feel my chest tightening, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on me. I wasn't sure how long we had been sitting there, when a knock at the door suddenly broke the stillness. My heart skipped a beat, and my stomach tightened in a way I hadn't expected. The sound of Jack's voice, familiar and completely unknowing, made the tension in the room all the more palpable. Jack, Olivia froze just for a moment. Our eyes met, and in that fleeting glance, I could see it, the same recognition in her eyes that was in mine. This was the moment we were both trying to avoid, the moment that would either force us to face the truth or let it linger in silence. In the living room, Olivia called. Standing quickly and walking to the door, her expression was calm, but I could see the subtle tension in her shoulders, in the way her hands moved, a little more deliberately than usual. I stood up too, my heart racing. Jack couldn't see me like this. He couldn't see what had happened. "I thought you'd still be asleep," Jack called as he stepped inside, his voice casual, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I decided to stop by early. The rain passed through the city center anyway. I walked into the living room, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. There was no hiding the discomfort I felt, though. Every step felt heavier, every movement more deliberate as I walked into the familiar space. But it felt so different now. The air between Olivia and me seemed thicker, charged with everything we hadn't yet said. "Liam." Jack looked surprised to see me, his voice carrying that carefree tone that made it all the more difficult to stay in the moment. "What are you doing here? I stopped by yesterday." "But you weren't home," I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. Though my heart was hammering in my chest, Olivia suggested I wait out the storm, and it didn't let up. Jack didn't seem to think twice about it. He laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. "Great, I hope you didn't eat all of Mom's homemade bread." He joked his usual, easygoing manner, covering the sudden tension that had formed around us. The three of us returned to the kitchen, and Olivia poured him some coffee, the clinking of mugs sounding oddly loud in the heavy silence between us. Jack started talking about his trip, cracking jokes and filling the air with his typical humor. But every time Olivia and I exchanged a glance, the unspoken understanding between us grew. Each look felt like it was adding another layer to the invisible wall between us. A wall that neither of us knew how to break down. When Jack got distracted scrolling through his phone, Olivia looked at me, and her gaze was intense, laden with a quiet urgency. She leaned in slightly, her voice barely audible. "We need to talk about this later," she whispered. I nodded, my heart still racing. Her words hung in the air. A promise, or maybe a warning. Either way, I knew that the weight of what had happened could not be ignored for much longer. It was as if everything between us had been placed on pause, waiting for the right moment to either move forward or collapse under its weight. After breakfast, Jack announced that he was going to the store and invited me along. I couldn't refuse. I needed to get out of the house to put some distance between me and the questions that have been swirling in my mind. But even as we stepped outside into the rain, I knew nothing would be resolved. Olivia's words and her touch from the night before were still there, lingering unanswered. As we made our way down the street, I glanced back at the house. Through the window, I saw Olivia standing by the window watching us. Her gaze was intense, but there was something else, something I couldn't quite place. A mix of sadness, gratitude, and maybe even fear. She wasn't just watching us, she was watching me, and I couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. The rain fell steadily, damp and cold against my skin. But inside, the emotions I was carrying felt much heavier than the weather around me. Every step I took away from the house felt like I was distancing myself from something important, something I couldn't yet understand. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. That night had opened a door that couldn't be closed again. Every step forward would come with more difficult questions, and the answers to those questions would change everything. Jack talked about his trip, sharing his usual small talk, but my mind was elsewhere. I tried to focus, tried to listen, but it was impossible to ignore the swirling uncertainty in my chest. That day, I realized that my life had already shifted in ways I wasn't prepared for, and I didn't know where it would lead. But I also knew this: whatever path I chose from here on out, it would be filled with hard decisions, and the answers would shape everything from here on. As we wrap up this story, we've witnessed moments of unexpected connection, the complexities of human emotions, and the challenges of navigating personal boundaries. We've seen how one decision, one encounter can change the course of a relationship, and how we must reflect on our choices and their consequences. So what have you learned so far? Take a moment to think about the lessons or realizations that resonated with you. Is it about the importance of being honest with yourself and relationships, or perhaps how to navigate the delicate balance between affection and boundaries? I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below, sharing one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into practice in your own life. If you like this video, don't forget to leave your comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insightful content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.